Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with a Week 4 DFS preview for tomorrow's main slate. Gonna go through some of the top stacking options for GPP contests and some of my top props for Underdog and on Prize Picks. They give you an idea of some of the few spots you might want to consider to go out there and get some exposure yourself. By the end, whether you're playing over there on the DFS and fantasy side or just trying to get some player props in, you'll be armed with the knowledge you need to go out there and make tomorrow a profitable and successful slate on your end. So a lot to talk about here. Let's go ahead, start it off with our top stacks of the week. First up, we've got ourselves probably the most popular game for tomorrow's slate, but perhaps a little bit of an unorthodox way of attacking it. Between Buffalo and Miami, we've got an unbelievably high-scoring affair, well over a 50-point total, and two of the more competent offenses in the entire league, right? Let alone out there in the AFC East. So anytime we have a Josh Allen, a Tua going head-to-head, a lot of people are going to flock to that kind of game environment, and at least based on the early ownership projections, most of them are going to take Josh Allen. And while I think he's more than viable to go out there and play in large field contest, you're going to get a lot of the game theory edge taken away. He's one of the higher owned, if not the highest owned quarterbacks on all of the slate. And then some of the pairings with him, like Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, whether it's a Kincaid or a Knox at tight end, are all extremely popular options. It just makes it a little bit tough in the large field GPPs, right? So maybe going to the other side, taking a Tua Tagovailoa is a little bit of a contrarian, sneaky way to get to this game environment. So you can see on here, I have him in my player pool, just projected to be 3.1% projected owned at quarterback. And of course, with options like Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle returning this week, Durham Smythe, both running backs, Mostert, A-Chain, viable options to mix in with him. The options are really endless on that, Miami Dolphins offense. And of course, I would recommend buying it back if you're in that large field kind of contest. You just want as much exposure to this game environment as possible. So whether that be a Diggs, Davis, Kincaid, Knox, Cook, all are great options for this kind of stack. I'm really liking this game environment, right? So whether you want to be chalky about it, take Josh Allen, or maybe be a little bit sneakier like I'm doing out there with the Tua side, it's a game environment that everyone is going to pay attention to. And really, to win the GPPs tomorrow, it's going to be how you incorporate this game into your lineups, and doing that effectively that wins you that GPP, whether it's stacking Tua, whether it's taking the chalky Josh Allen and differentiating us, or maybe it's just taking 1-2 pieces of each team without stacking either offense that gets you there in the large field GPP. I think you want to have exposure to this divisional matchup, and given how competent the offenses are and the lack of other competent offenses on the slate, could be extremely important tomorrow. Next up, we've got the Kirk Cousins stack out there playing against the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers side, I don't think are as much of a must play option, not as much of like a force-in spot as what we had with the buybacks over there with Buffalo, but still Kirk Cousins, as 0-3 at this point, has his back against the wall, has to go out there and produce this week. And with a 46.5 point total, this Carolina versus Vikings game might not seem like one of the better game targets to attack, but is up there in the top 3 in terms of implied total. And with the Vikings, of course, the favorites here, they have one of the higher team totals on the entire slate. So for Kirk Cousins, an extremely concentrated offense there with him and his pass catchers. They did add Cam Akers to the mix. So Alexander Mattison, maybe not as much of a bell cow back as he was going to be there before, but still a ton of stacking options that you can use with a Kirk Cousins, whether it's Justin Jefferson, you could go out there, pay up at tight end, take Hawkinson as well. Addison's a little bit cheaper. Those running backs are pretty cheap on the Vikings as well. And though I do like Sanders, Adam Thielen, little revenge game as potential buybacks, I don't think you have to force in the buyback, right? You can see you have the little buyback option as sometimes on there, are all going to be viable options and potential plays that you can get to. Worth noting that Thielen is getting quite a bit of ownership, so we'll go ahead and show you what I'm talking about there. Though he has an extremely high points per dollar projection, actually over a 3x projection there, is projecting for over 16% ownership. So that's why I think it's okay to buy it back, but just know that Thielen especially, right? Miles Sanders maybe to a little bit of a less extent. Of course, some of the secondary wide receivers for Carolina probably not going to get much ownership either. But Adam Thielen specifically, right, is going to be by far the most prominent option that people are buying it back with. So if you're in a large field GPP, maybe you just buy it back with anybody but an Adam Thielen, right, and hope that that revenge narrative isn't the spot of the game that you have to have. And maybe it's somebody that catches a 50, 60-yard touchdown instead that you're playing at lower ownership. So again, Kirk Cousins, not like he's super chalky, right? He's only 5% owned at quarterback, but higher owned than a Tua, which is pretty crazy considering the game environment difference. So maybe you do want to get a little bit different with that buyback or just completely abandon that idea altogether. But the last play we're going to get to for the stacks portion of this video is Joe Burrow at $6,500. So Joe Burrow hasn't had the best start to the year. The ownership reflects that. Really, price tag does too at just $6,500. And the matchup this week doesn't scream shootout, right? High scoring, high paced affair against the Titans. But one thing I know about Joe Burrow is that he breaks slates at low ownership. And at $6,500, Joe Burrow's way too cheap. You take a look at some of the receiving options. Even Chase is down here, he's like the 5th or 6th most expensive wide receiver. You go down here, T. Higgins is relatively cheap too, only $6,800, way cheaper than he typically is on all of these DFS slates. Not only do we have an affordable Joe Burrow, also one without pretty much any ownership, right? He's only 3.6% owned there, and kind of like the Kirk Cousins stacks, I don't think you have to buy it back, but Joe Burrow, like I said, breaks slates, right? He throws for 500 yards. Sometimes it's multiple 200-yard wide receivers on his team, right? Sometimes it's Chase Higgins going out there for just absolute field days. I love playing Joe Burrow at low ownership, and the matchup against the Titans, their secondary not all that special, right? They're more of a nuisance because of how much they run the ball, how much they like to control the game clock out there, right? Time of possession, right? They like to be a hog when it comes to that category. That isn't always the case though, right? Sometimes the Titans get a little bit torched, right? They're not going to be perfect out there on the defensive side, and what better person than the highest paid player in the league to go out there and potentially torch that defense. So beginning of last week was not great for Joe Burrow. Started to look a lot better in the second quarter and on out there in Monday Night Football. So hopefully that's a sign of things to come. And, if you're looking for an ownership pivot, somebody that I think is just completely mispriced too, Joe Burrow's your guy. And he could be that sneaky option that wins you a few GPPs this week. All right, and now for the prop side of things. So one slip I want to point out on Underdog is this over on James Cook's rushing yards, and then you have Jalen Waddle over receiving yards. Waddle was actually at 59.5 a little bit ago, heavily juiced towards the over on books, and over there on Prize Picks is at 62.5. I saw him at 63.5 for a few minutes out there as well. And on Caesars William Hill is like minus 155 for over the 60.5 yard mark. The odds makers, the sports books, are clearly very favorable on Jalen Waddle this weekend. So we talked about this high total game potentially being a stack for fantasy. Well, I like it potentially for stacks for DFS too, right? Over here for props. So on the other side, we've got James Cook, who's also about minus 140, depending on the book you're looking at, for his over at 58.5 rushing yards. So between the pairing here of two players that I expect to be in a high total game, of course, there's a little bit of correlation between the two there too, right? If James Cook is playing in a positive game script, well, not only does that mean that he's likely to get more carries, but it also means that the Dolphins are less likely to run and more likely to pass the ball, right? So if we're going to get into a script where Cook is at an advantage, well, that also brings Jalen Waddle along with him. You could say the same thing would be a negative, right, if they get into negative game scripts, but anytime we're playing for a 3x payout here, right, we want to be correlating props, right? There's always going to be positive, negative correlation to work with. And given that both are juiced towards the over here, I think that the common sentiment around the betting industry is that the game script of Buffalo leading is the one that's more likely to come to fruition. You have a few things supporting that. Of course, the spread, obviously Buffalo at home, right, helps their case quite a bit there. So definitely a prop slip that I like going for over there in Underdog. And over there in Prize Picks, because we did have that bump on Jalen Waddle, I'm going with the same James Cook prop, but mixing him in with Josh Palmer's receiving yards. Josh Palmer's at 44.5 on a lot of sports books and heavily juiced towards the over. 130 on a few books, 135, 145 out there on Draftkings Sportsbook. So definitely value that I wanted to go out there and grab and lock in what I think is also going to be a high-scoring game. You've got the Raiders defense that wasn't able to stop Kenny Pickett out there, of course. That was a sick game to see in person, but that Raiders defense not all that impressive out there. So I agree with the over. The sports books, the gambling sentiment out there seems to agree with the Josh Palmer over. And without having Mike Williams in the fold, you have somebody like Palmer playing a lot more snaps. They do have Quinn Johnston, who's going to play quite a bit as well out there. Is going to see an increased workload. But Palmer, the more established veteran, right, a player that knows the playbook, the scheme a little bit more than the rookie out there, is the one that early on is probably going to get the bump, right? Maybe later on you see a Johnston take on that larger role, but at least the first few weeks while Mike Williams is out, I think that Palmer is going to be the one that you see that production for. So like his over on James Cook there too, for a little two-man card that you can get to. Alrighty, boys, that is all I've got for the Week 4 preview. Before you hopping out of here, first off, smash that like button for me, and also comment down below your top player to stack for this weekend, right? So maybe it's Josh Allen chalk, maybe it's one of the 3 sneakier options that we talked about here, or somebody completely out of right field. Would love to hear your comments down below and your thoughts for this week. If you want access to all the projections that you saw throughout the video, check out my Patreon page. On there is where you can see all of my spreadsheets posted. So everything that was blacked out on there, including my modeling, projections for every player, player pool, different prop slips that I'm entering throughout the week. Make sure to check that out. We had plenty of props already bumped to this point. We had an over on Joe Burrow first downs. That went from 8.5 to 10.5 just half an hour after I entered the props. We had a few other ones like Jalen Waddle get bumped that we talked about throughout the video. So for access to all of those immediately, right, before any of that movement, so you go ahead and lock them in yourselves, check out the Patreon for that too. There's different tiers based on DFS, props, combo tiers to go ahead and cater the experience based on the content that you're looking for, and goes a long way with helping support the channel as well. So like I said, guys, I appreciate the support here. Smash that like button. Like I said, comment your top stack of the week, and let's go out there and have ourselves a weekend. Best of luck with those lineups, any prop slips that you're entering, and hope to see your names at the top of those GPPs.